As Pastor Kyle mentioned earlier, people asked Jesus a lot of questions. 183 to be precise. Of these, he only gives direct answers to 3 of them. More often, he answers folks' questions with more questions. 307, according to the people who count these things. In this case, Jesus is being questioned by a higher temporal authority, the high priest of the temple in Jerusalem, leader of the Sanhedrin, the governing religious body, who doesn't take kindly to his typical evasiveness. In fact, one of the nearby guards punches Jesus in the face for his trouble. This may seem like an odd text, a defensive one even, to read before questioning the pastors. But as Jesus tells the high priest, his earlier preaching ought to speak for itself. Similarly, I would hope that you all have a somewhat decent sense of what we believe, having listened to our reflections in the pulpit for so long. That said, if there is anything that we can clarify, we'll try to give you a direct answer insofar as we can, with the usual caveat that we don't have all the answers, only ideas, beliefs, and perspectives. Personally, I'm just glad this is a friendlier audience than the Sanhedrin. And if you don't like our answers, well, please don't hit us.
A reading from John 18:19 to 23. Then the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. Jesus answered, I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temple where all the Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who heard what I said to them. They know what I said. When he had said this, one of the police standing nearby struck Jesus on the face, saying, Is that how you answer the high priest? Jesus answered, If I have spoken wrongly, testify to the wrong. If I have spoken rightly, why do you strike me? Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. Amen.
That we've received both online this week as well as this morning, just now, and she will be posing them to us at her discretion.
It's hard to decide. There are a lot of good ones. We'll start with an easy one. What is your happiest time of the church year?
Happiest time of the church year. There are so many joyful occasions throughout the year, but I would probably say, if I had to choose, I'd probably say Rally Day, which is coming up in a couple of weeks. Soft pitch. September 10th, we'll be kicking off the church year and having a big celebration, courtesy of our Connections Committee and a lot of volunteers that make it happen. It's really just a great celebration in the life of the church, as folks who have been traveling for the summer and have maybe not been able to attend in person as often all come back together. Things really pick up again, light up again. Church really springs to life. Although I will say it's been a great summer, and it certainly doesn't feel lifeless by any stretch. But looking forward to the big celebration in a couple of weeks.
I guess I'll say I have not been to a Rally Day yet, but I'm looking forward to that. But I'd say, not having been through a full year here, my favorite time in the week of church is this worship time. It just feeds my soul. So I just love our worship. So.
Great. We have questions that are one directed at Kyle and one for Seth, related to the Bible. So, Kyle, besides Jesus, what character in the Bible do you think has a really interesting backstory that you would recommend we explore?
Oh, I think it's got to be Mary Magdalene. I love Mary Magdalene, and there's some interesting new research on John 11 that, like, where the early scribes crossed out Mary, who they think Mary Magdalene was, and put in Martha, and they think that Magdalene was not like where Mary was from, Magdala, but it means the tower. So Peter was the rock, and Mary was the tower. So she just sparks my imagination a lot.
Thank you. All right, this one is for you, Seth. Why are the prophets in the Old Testament listed as major or minor? This is actually a multi-part question. Let's start with that one.
Oh, is my... Yeah. You couldn't hear? You got me on, guys? All right.
And it goes on to ask, which book in the Old Testament would you recommend to a member of this congregation and why?
Well, my understanding of the major and minor prophets largely has to do with the length of the book. You know, the minor prophets tend to be very, brief expositions compared to the so-called major ones. As for Old Testament books that I would recommend, I've always loved the Hebrew Bible, as we generally call it now. Even though it has a lot of problematic texts, it's such a great repository of stories. The stories are just amazing. And it's helpful if you can read them with a critical eye and not, have to worry constantly about did God do this? Did God really do that? My reading, this is a little more elaborate than you asked, but my reading of those texts really is that these are all interpretations, ancient interpretations of God's action in the world, right? Which I don't necessarily agree with those interpretations, but they do have a lot of great stories. That being said, the one I tend to prefer, or that speaks to me the most, and that I think I would recommend to folks, is probably Ecclesiastes, which is one of the wisdom texts. And that actually doesn't have really any stories in it, ironically, but it's just, strikes me as a very raw and honest interrogation of life and life's troubles and problems and frustrations and sorrows and joys. And it's a person, supposedly King Solomon, really wrestling with all of the big questions that we all wrestle with and struggle with, some of which may come up this morning. And it's just a really unflinching kind of look at them that doesn't offer any pat or easy answers, but really forces us to struggle with the questions.
That's a great segue. How do you reconcile your belief in God with the terrible events in the world? In Exodus, God gets our hopes up with a tale of intervention and deliverance. But day to day, it seems maybe our only way to free the exploited and oppressed is to support legislation. This is a question that weighs on the heart of the questioner.
You want to take a first shot at it?
Yeah, I mean, from the beginning, it's been a fallen world. That's kind of what the whole of the Bible tells us, right? We live in a fallen world. Writer I like, Barbara Brown Taylor, says, when you read about miracles, the problem with reading about miracles is it makes you want one of your own. And you don't always get one, right? I I believe that the Exodus story is telling us a deeper truth than maybe what really happened. Did Jesus part the Red Sea or send locusts or whatever? But what it's telling us is that God liberates, that maybe not as we would like to have it, and maybe not through a miracle that we would choose out of a Sears, catalog, but that it's testimony that God does liberate, that God does, eventually head us toward a freedom and a life. And so I guess that would be my question, or my answer.
I would add that God liberates through us and through people, much as God liberates via Moses and other characters in the Bible, right? And part of that is the ability to choose, and the whole notion of free will that I think really creates a great deal of the suffering in the world, frankly. We create a lot of the suffering in the world, almost all of it, really, directly or indirectly. And so the question then becomes, I guess, why doesn't God intervene? Why does God let these terrible things happen? Well, it's interesting when a kid suffers for one reason or another, that doesn't make us question their parents' love for them. And some would say, well, God's supposed to be omnipotent, right? A parent isn't. A parent would take that suffering away if they could, and that's probably true. But I don't know that they should, right? Because if a parent took away every child's pain, every pain that their child felt, that child would never grow, would never learn, would never mature. And I don't know why we're all here on this material plane necessarily. It could be, the result of some cosmic fall. It could be part of the plan. But I think that God doesn't intervene in things directly, at least not often, because I do think we're here to learn and grow and mature spiritually. I believe that's what's the meaning of life. I would say that's it.
Thank you. How many more do you want to take? A couple more?
Oh yeah, we've got
plenty of time. We're going to get more than what you thought in. Good. Okay, so here's one maybe related to some of the popular movies that we've seen this summer, but also very present in our society. How would God and Jesus address the impact of patriarchy on both women and men?
Well, I can't speak for God, but I can talk about patriarchy. I don't know. Did y'all see Barbie? Some of you saw Barbie? Yeah. I love what somebody wrote on Facebook or something saying, I took my 11, 12-year-old to see it, and as we were walking out, he said, "Mom, what's patriarchy?" So it did what it was supposed to do, right, is to get us thinking about what patriarchy is. I think patriarchy is a thread that has run through our culture and still does. Just like, I don't know, racism or all kinds of isms, they put certain glasses on us as we look at the world. What we know is in Genesis, God's pronoun is they. We know that we're made in God's image, male and female. We know that it wasn't I believe it wasn't God's purpose to make one gender above another. And we know Jesus made a point out of women disciples and seeing women in all their strength and all their capabilities. And so I take a lot of, I guess, a lot of importance in that as a woman. And even Paul said, there is no slave or free, no male or female, no Jew nor Greek. We are all one in Christ. So that's what I would say.
I would add that patriarchy is really just another form of control and domination, right? And sadly, human beings as a whole, as a collective, seem to veer towards systems of domination. Whether that's out of a more malicious need to subvert other people, or whether it's out of a fear of not having enough, or and needing to kind of cling to resources and power, et cetera, et cetera. That is the tendency that we've exhibited as a people. And I think Jesus was very stood against all forms of dominion and domination and subjugation. And sadly, the world we live in today really isn't much different. I mean, I talk about it all the time. There's all kinds of exploitation and oppression happening at all levels. Patriarchy is yet another unfortunate reflection of that. But as Pastor Kyle said, Jesus really made a point of empowering women in his circle and in his midst. And I think a lot of that was sort of systematically removed after the fact from the narrative. Women are sort of, their names are taken out, their role diminished, and that's because of course the early church was all run by men, and continuing to try to control the narrative and dominate others. So our call as Christians, I think, is to really work towards a great equalization in a sense, and really strive against exploitation and domination in all of its forms.
Okay, thank you. I've got a couple more. How do you feel about the thought, everything happens for a reason, or it was God's will?
How do I feel about those things? I feel like that's like the worst thing anyone can say to anybody who is really, really hurting. There are probably times where that might feel like a balm to somebody, but I think most of the time it's just like speaking for God and putting God in a box and trivializing people's pain and suffering.
I think it's often stated as God has a plan. And my response to that is always, I don't believe that God has a plan, but I believe that God has a will. The difference being the plan sort of lays out a series of events, right? Like, this is what's going to happen, and this happened for a reason. This happened so that this could happen. There's a great speech in Candide from Voltaire where Pangloss the philosopher is talking about, he's trying to justify syphilis, I think, which he has. And he goes on this long, sort of convoluted explanation where it ends that, like, because of all this, we now have chocolate. And therefore, it was all worthwhile, basically, we contracted this from, the New World, et cetera, but then because of our travels there, we got these plants, and now we have chocolate, so, my nose is falling off, but I have a candy bar, so that's great. And so that's like God has a plan, right? God has a will is the way I think that God would like us to respond and behave in a given circumstance, right? Like, God has a will for us to be compassionate. God has a will for us to be kind. God has a will for us to be hopeful. God has a will for us to be loving, all those kinds of things, so that when, disaster strikes, again, there's a great line in Ecclesiastes that says, like fish caught in a net or birds caught in a cruel snare, time and chance happen to them all. So it is for humans when catastrophe strikes. So no, I don't think God, ordains our misery or says you're going to get cancer or you're, going to die in an accident, or whatever. But that rather has a will for how we navigate those situations, and to do so with love and compassion for each other.
Okay, I've got two more. This one's a quick one, and it was meant for Seth, but I'm curious about both of you. Are golden retrievers your favorite kind of dog?
So I think my wife asked this question. She told me I know it when I heard it. And I think it's a test. But yes, absolutely. I will say I was never much of a dog person until we got our golden retriever, and she's made a convert out of me. I adore her.
I just like dogs. Well, that's not true. I was about to say I've never been a dog I didn't like. There's probably been some dogs I don't like, but I have a 8-year-old Great Dane who's on her way out. She's in doggy hospice right now. So, but yeah, I like golden retrievers too. Like, what's not to like, right?
Exactly. Okay, this is a good one to close. What church initiative are you most excited about in the coming year?
What church? What?
Church initiative.
Initiative.
I'm really excited about all the stuff that the Green Team is doing. It's really a great group of folks that have been doing a lot of good work. I'm excited about the Eden Project and all the vegetables we've been growing. I'm excited, although I don't fully understand it, but I'm excited about the more technical aspects of electrifying our building and helping others to do so in their homes. We're going to have some adult ed on that in the fall. And it's good to see, kind of the church rising to the challenge of mitigation and adaptation in a changing world. So I'm excited about that.
Awesome. Me too. Yeah, we're working on some adult ed. One of the initiatives, I'm hoping that now that we're going to one service, that we will have a dedicated adult ed time right after service, so that people will just kind of have that as part of their routine. But we haven't really announced it yet, but I'm just looking at Michelle and saying, can we talk about this? Michelle has been really wanting to have us be part of a project that is called Royalties for Spirituals, for Negro Spirituals, wherein we pay royalties for spirituals to some organization in the community that we partner with. So we're just sort of right at the very beginning for this, because I see it as an opportunity for us to open the topic of anti-racism and like learning about it and partnering with other community organizations that are that can help us to learn and grow, and so that we can do justly. So I'm excited about that. You'll hear more about it as the year goes by.
Okay, if your question didn't get answered, think about sending a message or talking with the pastors afterwards.
Yeah, I would always add, happy to meet for coffee, happy to answer emails, happy to chat on the phone, any thoughts or questions you may have. Always happy to engage. So, thank you all.